Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to yet another Policy Monday here at the Lawyers Hub. My name is Justice Silas Owite, where in this session we will be talking about the use of technology in Africa's elections, reimagining the digital democracy in Kenya's and Nigeria's election. Today, we have gathered here to discuss the role of technology in African elections and specifically in Kenya and Nigeria. As we know that we are just from Nigeria's election, it's just been a week. And I decided to ask ChatGPT which country and when was technology first introduced in Africa's election, and I verified it afterwards. But let me just give you the response. It's responded that the first election in Africa was used in the Namibian presidential election, which was held in November 2014. And the country's electoral commission introduced electronic voting machines to replace paper ballots. It has just been a week since Nigeria took to the front and casted their votes in the recently concluded general elections, and the 2023 election saw the use of the bimodal voter accreditation system, BVAS, if I've not got it wrong, yes, which is an electronic system used to verify the identity of voters. We'll discuss how this technology worked and whether it was successful in reducing electoral fraud and improving transparency. We will also explore how technology can be used to improve democracy in Kenya and Nigeria and also the rest of the countries in Africa. And with the advancement of digital technology, we can reimagine democracy in ways that were not possible before. So don't forget to tell us where you're watching us from and leave us your name if you're joining us from a different organization or a different country. Please, on the chat box, leave it there. We will mention it out. So to guide us in our discussion today, we are honored to have with us Dixon Ogugu, a tech policy assistant here at the Lawyers Hub. Dixon has extensive experience in technology policy, and he will share his insights and thoughts on the use of technology in African elections. So, Dixon, are you ready? Okay, so Dixon is ready to take us in the first section. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dixon Ogugu to this webinar. And you can also comment and tag us in our social media platforms, Twitter at Lawyers Hub Kenya, Instagram, Lawyers Hub Kenya, LinkedIn, also at Lawyers Hub Kenya, and Facebook too. So without further ado, let me welcome Dixon Ogugu.
Okay, thank you, Silas, for the wonderful introduction. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dixon, as Silas has said. I'm here to give you a very brief overview of the use of technology in Africa's general elections, basically examining democracy in Kenya and Nigeria. So an overview of the use of technology in Africa, you can see as technology has had an increasing use in elections globally, with the aim of making voting process faster, more secure, and more accurate. So the use of technology in elections can be used in many forms. That is electronic voting machines, online voter registration, mobile voting apps, biometric voter verification, blockchain-based systems that you have seen in our various countries like Kenya, and Nigeria, Namibia, and across the continent. Basically, the first countries to experiment the use of technology in elections were Brazil, India, and the US during the 2000s, where they used the technology too in their particular elections. And the electronic machines for voting have been praised for the ability to reduce time taken in counting the votes. They've also increased voter turnout and also eliminated the errors associated with the manual voter counting. As you can also see, but you see the use of technology is a very complex and controversial issue that requires careful consideration and deliberation, as we are actually having today, to see the potential and benefits and the risks to democracy in our continent. So giving a walk of the Nigerians elections, Nigeria gained its independence in 1960 and did their first elections in 1964, where the elections were conducted by the Electoral Commission of Nigeria, that the CECN. Then in 1966, Nigeria experienced its first military coup, which disrupted the democratic process in Nigeria, suspended the constitution, dissolved the election commission, and then during this particular period, elections were either cancelled, manipulated, or rigged. So in 1998, General Bakar-led military government announced a transition to democracy and established what we call the Independent National Electoral Commission in 1998, just before the new Constitution of Nigeria, which was in force in 1999. And the INEC was tasked with conducting free, fair, and credible elections. Since then, from 1999, after the new constitution, to 2010, Nigeria has conducted 4 presidential elections and several gubernatorial, senatorial, and local government elections using a manual voting system that only requires paper forms where voter IDs were manually issued. The voter registration exercise was conducted periodically, and eligible voters were required to present their national ID cards and other forms of identification to obtain their ID cards. In 2011, Nigeria introduced electronic voting machines and voter registration equipments for the first time. So this particular period, the electronic machines were used for biometric verification of voters, and the voter registration equipment was also used to capture the biometric data of voters. However, the electronic voting machine were not used for actual casting of ballots. In 2017, INEC introduced a new and improved CVR system that relied heavily on technology. The system included an online registration period, portal, a biometric registration system, and a permanent voter card, PVC, printing machine. Also in 2019, Nigeria conducted its 6th general elections since independence, and INEC relied heavily on technology in various aspects of the electoral process. Electronic card readers were used for biometric verification of voters, and results were transmitted electronically from the polling stations to the correlation centers. However, the elections were not without controversies, as there were allegations of voter buying, violence, and voter suppression. So now we can also have a look at our Kenya work of elections since independence, which we gained our independence as a country in 1963 and held our first elections in 1963 and 1969. The elections were conducted by the Electoral Commission of Kenya, EECK, which was responsible for voter registration, candidate nomination, and the announcement of results. In 1982, Kenya became a one-party state. That is, only one party was the one recognized in the country, which was the Kenya African National Union, KANU, which controlled all aspects of the electoral process. The ECK, the Electoral Commission of Kenya, was abolished, and the government-appointed body, the Electoral Commission Monitoring Committee, EMS, took over its functions. Then in 1992 to Kenya, in 1991, the multi-party politics was restored in Kenya, where now Kenya allowed many parties to form, and a new electoral body, the Electoral Commission of Kenya, ECK, was established to conduct elections. The ECK was tasked with ensuring free, fair, and transparent elections. As you can see from the period of 1991 to 2002, most elections that in the country were conducted using what we call a Mlolongo system, where people used to come to the polling station, make a line, and then the voting will be conducted. So from 1992 to 2012, Kenya conducted 5 presidential elections and several parliamentary elections using a manual voting system. The voter registration process actually involved the use of paper forms like Nigeria. Voter IDs were manually issued, and the voter registration exercise was conducted periodically, and eligible voters were required to present their national ID cards and other forms of identification to obtain their voter ID cards. That is, maybe you can use your passport as your identification. Also, we can see that Kenya in 2013 introduced electronic technology system where in elections introduced what we call a biometric voter registration system for the first time, where Kenya used during your voting system, when you want to register, you just walk into the polling station where you want to register, and then you provide your ID, and then the system, there was a machine where you just put your fingerprint, they take your details, then to put the details in your machine. And then you can see now there was now a change of the manual system to technological system from 2013, where now we experienced some new system in the country. We use now technology up to date, where now elections are conducted using technological forms. The KIMS kits we experience, when you go to register as a voter, you are required to have a fingerprint and all sorts of those things. So you can see there was a change between our previous system. We have just moved from the Mlolongo system to the now voting in 2002, where you have to just walk there, you are given a voter card, then you vote. But then now in 2013, we now experience the use of technology, where now you can see we have the KIMS kits up to date and all various forms of technology that we use in our elections. That's just an overview of what elections in this particular both countries look like. And the transition from independence to now in 2023, where now we are having a technology-based elections. Now, data collection in Nigeria before technology, where the data used in elections, which data is required. So you can see before technology, we used to have a manual system. Now, what used to happen is when you want to vote, when you are eligible to vote, you go to the polling place where you register as a voter. You present your national ID card to the electoral commissions who are there, and then they will fill a form. This particular form, they require the following information: your name, your age, your gender, sometimes occupation, your address, your constituency where you are in, and where you want to vote, your polling station. So this information was then stored, it's manually processed, that is the form, then stored in a particular housing. It's not like today, now we have technology. Then the system was like, you go, I'm sure majority of you have voted using that particular system, where you go there, you present your ID, they take your information, they show it in a particular form, then the form is stored in a particular room, then during the elections, they bring out the form, now you vote, they identify you as a voter using what you call a manual register, where now you are identified as a voter, then you vote. So the data collected in that particular period was just your name, your constituency where you want to vote, your polling station, and your address, and maybe your gender as either male or female, and then your occupation. That's similar to Kenya and Nigeria. But now, when you look at the difference between what you used to have before technology and now they need, for example, in Nigeria, now when you want to vote as a voter, they need first your name, your polling station, your fingerprint. Now it's the difference, your face, where you take a photo of you, they store it in a card. In Kenya, there's a SD card. In Nigeria, the same thing. The information is stored in a machine, as compared to before the technology, the data was stored in a room in a form. So that's basically the difference between data collected then and data collected now. As you can see, just trying to tell you the difference between the manual system we had in before the use of technology in our elections. Now, I just walked you through the data collected. Now I can walk you through how the election data was stored. The storage of this particular data before technology, like I said, the data is filled in a form, and this form is stored in a house, a warehouse. Maybe each IBC house office, they have a warehouse where they store this particular data in a form. This form which you filled, then that's where the data is stored. But right now, your data is stored in an SD card with the systems in IBC. This data is different because then before they used to only pick your name and other things like address, but now they also take your photo, they also take your fingerprints, and in Nigeria they also take your face because they use facial recognition as a voter. How results were transmitted before elections and after elections. Before the technology, transmission of results was manually, where once you vote, the form is filled where the IBC or the INEC commission officials fill a form. In Nigeria, the form is Form EC 8A or result sheet. In Kenya, it's Form 34A. That's the polling station form. Then the polling station form is transmitted to, maybe in Nigeria now, the form is taken to the collation center and then transmitted manually to the main tallying center. In Kenya, the form was filled at 4A, taken from the polling station, taken to the constituency by road or by air, and then from the constituency, it's taken now to the tallying center by road. That's before technology. But now, after technology, we can see that the form, once filled, the form for the results, they have counted, the results have been taken into account. They take a photo of that particular form, they upload it online. Now you can see there's online uploading of the forms. After the online uploading of the forms, it's then actually also it's transmitted manually to the tallying center, to the main tallying center. Maybe let's say Bomas, and in Nigeria they have their own tallying center. But then in the difference between the two is now they take a photo of the form and then upload it online and then send it to the tallying center online, and then as they were wait for the original form, which is now transmitted manually. But then before technology, the form was filled in the polling station, transported to the tallying center. There was no use of uploading of forms and sending of results by air, by technology. Now that's the difference that you can see. That technology has just helped us in this particular aspect. So in summary of it is, before technology, the system was fair. It was easy because it was filled with a lot of malpractice, yes, but then you can see you only needed a few of your data, you only needed a few of your instruments. The system was, you feel that the form is filled, then transported to the tallying center. It takes a lot of time. But now in technology, you can see the form once it's filled, they take a photo of it, upload it online, and then the system automatically, they will get the information after the end of the polling day. But before then, the information of the polling station was got by the IBC office in the main office. After a while, after the form has been transported to that particular tallying center. So that's the difference, and I hope this particular overview has given you a very good analysis of where we have come from as two countries. Technically, they can give you a snapshot of how African countries have transformed from the use of manual system, and now we are now using what we call electronic technological systems that help our elections be more transparent and also more simpler and also very fast to manage. So I wish you very good luck as the panelists are trying to discuss an in-depth analysis of technology use in our elections. Thank you, and have a lovely session.
Thank you so much, Dixon. You've actually taken us further about how to use this system. And I am sure that we are getting closer to what we want to really talk about. And I'd really want to ask you, do you really trust these systems? There was that system before where we could use it manually, but right now we're using the electronic system. So right now I'd want to invite Rispa Onyango. She is the policy lead here at the Lawyers Hub. We're going to run a poll together, and I'd really want to invite her. She can introduce herself too, and we can start off the poll to just give you still more insights on the use of technology in Africa's election. Thank you, Rispa, for joining us.
Thank you, Silas. It's a she, just to be clear. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Happy to have you on the call with us and excited about the discussion. I think at the Lawyers Hub, the team felt very invested in these particular elections because you were doing some research, you were following your news and just seeing how it was progressing. So thank you everyone who's joining us from Nigeria. Thank you for the guys expressing interest here from Kenya. And it's great to just kind of unpack how technology is actually affecting our elections. And the big question, you know, how is it affecting democracy? Is it good for democracy? Is it a hindrance? And how can we just make it better? So before we go to our panelists who are joining us on this call, Marcellus has mentioned, we'd just like to run a quick poll and just see your perspectives and your opinions on the various aspects of the discussions that we are having today. So the first question is just on the region. So where are you joining us from? Is it Western, Eastern, Central, Southern, Northern Africa? Are you joining us outside of Africa? So we'd be happy to kind of get that information from you.
Can see most are coming from Eastern Africa.
Yeah, that's really dope. Yeah. So our main guys are Eastern and Western Africa. Okay. So if you're coming from the rest of the world, the 5%, could you just tell us who you are on the chat section so that we really get to know exactly where it is you're joining us from? Okay. We'll go quickly to the next question. So most of our guys are Eastern Africa, Western Africa. We have a few from Southern Africa, which is good to see. And then the next question is going to be focusing on, I think, the use of technology itself.
Okay. Yes. The question is, do you trust the outcome of elections conducted using technology? Do you trust the outcome of elections conducted using technology? I can see responses are coming out. Yes, no, is the balance. The balance, I don't know if there's the not sure part, what was to be added there, but yes, no, yes is overwhelming, the no. Yes, keep your responses coming. Do you really trust the outcome of this election conducted using technology? I mean, Kenya, we can see instances like open the servers.
That's really interesting. It's a 50-50.
50-50.
So that's interesting. Okay, so let's see, we'll have a flip after we are done with that discussion today. Yeah. We'll quickly go to the third poll. I see it's a Twahir. I hope I pronounced that correctly. You said yes, but so we'll give you a chance to give us your insights a bit later on. So poll 3, do you know where the technology used in your country's election was procured from? Do you know where the technology used in your country's election was procured from? Again, it's a hot contest there.
Yeah, I can see.
So yes, 46%, no, 54%. So that's pretty close as well. At least the disparity is not crazy. So yeah, so we are at 45% saying yes, 55% saying no. Okay, so you can put it on the chat. Where are you coming from if you're saying no? Where are you coming from if you're saying yes? Okay. And then we'll proceed to poll 4.
I can see Joel Okwemba is saying no, depends on technology, maybe blockchain for a try. Anyway, let's go to poll question 4.
No, from Nigeria.
Yes. Okay. The question is, do you know how the data you provide during election is stored? Do you know how the data you provide during election is stored? Yes. Oh,
Okay,
no,
so,
is overwhelming.
Yeah, here the disparity is crazy. So yes, 22%, no, 78%. So the 22% tell us, well, where is your data stored, and which country are you joining us from? So that's interesting. Do you know where the data is stored in your country?
I don't know. I want the yes people to really answer this question. Personally, I don't know.
Is it because of ignorance, or it's actually because the information is not out there?
I feel it's because the information is really not out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's the
So
fact.
here we are leaning heavily towards the no.
Yes.
We're coming to the end of the poll. So question 5.
Can see here, Oluwase is saying no, elections are still rigged, even using technology. Nigeria is a case study.
Yeah. We're going to be getting into that discussion. So question 5, do you think the use of technology during elections in your country has increased voter turnout? Do you think the use of technology during elections in your country has increased voter turnout? I think for Kenya, Dixon really gave us some highlights.
Yes.
Moving from 2013, 2017, and 2022, we've definitely seen a gradual increase. But then the question has always come down to the actual people who vote on election day. So we've seen a disparity even in Kenya when it comes to the actual election day vis-a-vis the number of people who actually registered. So I'm seeing that 40% are saying yes, 59% are saying no. So 59% of us think that, don't think the technology has any contribution to the voter turnout. So that's one of the questions you're going to be posing to our panelists to just get his insights on the same. We see Tabitha saying the use of technology, in fact, limited the number of people who could vote.
Really?
So that's interesting to see that perspective.
Okay.
And I think we're coming to the very last question.
Yes, I can take the last question here. And the question is asking, in your opinion, does technology support democracy or does it hinder democracy? What is your opinion? I can see most are saying it promotes democracy. Just to take it again, in your opinion, does technology support democracy or does it hinder democracy? I can say promotes is just balancing between 80%, 79%, hinder at 19%. So most people think that technology promotes democracy, which is actually,
yeah, considering the first 5 questions has been a bit of 50-50 or more negative when it comes to the responses. Yes. So it's great to see that we actually think technology is a way to go, when it comes to our democracy. So thank you for engaging us on that. We just ran that poll to kind of see your views and also inform the conversations that you're going to be having moving forward in the next few minutes, the different aspects you're going to try and just unpack when it comes to the use of technology within our elections here in Africa. And joining us for this particular discussion and to give us perspective on Nigeria specifically, we have Mr. Solomon, who's joining us from Nigeria. And we are hoping that he's really going to just shed light on, the instances that were happening there, how the election looked like this past few weeks, and, the impact of that within their democratic processes. Now, we'll focus on Nigeria for a bit now, and then maybe just have bouncing back of ideas from the Kenyan perspective. So we're going to be having Oginga, who's going to be giving us the case law when it comes to the Kenyan perspective and the elections and how that has interacted with, our court system. And probably we'll get you guys from Nigeria giving us, what that looks like. What is the court process like in Nigeria, so that you can just have a comparative of notes and see how it is you can be able to issue recommendations and move forward progressively. Now, of course, we have all agreed that tech is here to stay, and it's definitely featuring more and more within the election processes across Africa. Yeah. And in this particular instance, in Nigeria, I think the Election Act 2022 is what is actually giving that legitimacy or validation for the use of technology within that particular jurisdiction. And the big question has always remained, is it actually good for democracy? Is it good for our democratic values, the principles that we have? Does it actually uphold them, or is it going to actually serve as a hindrance? To help us kind of unpack this topic further, I'm going to invite Solomon to first just introduce himself and tell us the nature of his work. And then we can quickly get into, what was the state of elections in Nigeria this time around? So welcome, Solomon. We're happy to have you join us.
Thank you, Rispa, for the introduction. And of course, thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and of course, good evening to you, depending on the time at your location. My name is Solomon Ukudera, and of course, I'm the co-founder of Digital Rights Lawyers Initiative. At Digital Rights Lawyers Initiative, DRLI for short, we work at the intersection of technology and human rights. Of course, we work on data protection, privacy, online expression, and of course, some other digital rights related issues. Of course, as long as they affect our existence and the core of human rights of the people.
Okay, so on to our first question, the use of tech in the just concluded elections in Nigeria. What was the state of the election period? What was the state of the processes in lieu of the use of technology? Could you just give us a brief overview of that? And then we can try to unpack the specific instances as relates to the use of technology.
Thank you so much, Rispa. Of course, to start with, I think it's quite exciting to know that the continent that has actually been described as people living on the tree or taking their water from the stream, is actually fast adopting technology for its day-to-day, activities, including electoral, exercises. And of course, as we stand today, there are 28 African countries that have adopted the use of technology, in their electoral practices. And of course, this includes Nigeria, Kenya, Namibia, Ghana, and the Gambia, among others. Now, so when you look at it, it is always a journey that is prompted by some, events. Ghana and Nigeria and Kenya actually shared, history in this regard. Both Nigeria's election of 2007 and that of Kenya actually recorded some large, cases of malpractices. And that actually led the two countries to consider, adoption of technology. So in Nigeria for 2022 election, of course, via the Electoral Act 2022, of course, the nation was actually moved to adopt the use of bimodal voter accreditation system, of course, otherwise known as BVAS, and of course, the INEC Result View Portal, regularly called, IREP. If you look at Kenya, Kenya also did the same thing, which, is something so the Kenya electoral management system, which comprises the BVR, the EBID, and of course is actually resource transmission system. Now, and in the last election of 25th February 2023, which was the election for presidential candidates, then the members of the National Assembly, Nigerians went to the poll to cast their votes. And these digital systems were deployed for casting of votes. Of course, during the election, quite a number of challenges were experienced. And of course, we saw some instances where some electorates could not be accredited, by virtue of some irregularities, some technical glitches, like a lack of network for some of those devices. So, but by and large, I can tell you for free that whenever you look at it, the use of deployment of technology for electoral practices in Africa is a system that has come to stay, because in a way, it enhances transparency, and of course, it takes out the incidences of electoral efficiency by the electoral bodies.
Okay, So I actually want us to focus on three main things, and that is voter registration, the accreditation or verification process, as well as the results management, because those I think are the primary ways in which we are so far using technology when we're not talking about, say, for instance, the social media aspects of it. And the first question that I think we even posed during the poll was on the voter registration element and how technology is impacting turnout. Now in Kenya, I think we've noticed a progressive increase. And I think someone has put it on the chat section that it could actually be attributed to an increase amongst voters during an election period. And so it doesn't qualify that it's just, you know, the technology that we are using that is contributing to, you know, increased turnout. I think, what is your perspective on that?
Well, I think it's quite helpful, and it has enhanced voter participation. But then I observed something even in the last election Nigeria conducted on February 25. Now, ordinarily, you know, the deployment of technology should be able to take out some things like underage voting. But when you look at it, in Nigeria, we saw videos of children, of teenagers who actually queued up and voted, you know, across the length and breadth of the country. So my question is, if we are deploying technology, these children were issued birth certificates, even if they do not have NIN. Some of them have been issued NIN, which is the national identification number in Nigeria. So I think it is very important for the electoral body to be able to synchronize this data together to the point that if a person needs to get registered, you can produce a particular ID. For example, the NIN. With that NIN, if you are not 18, you cannot be registered to vote. That is the law in Nigeria. So it's so appalling to realize that persons less than 18 were actually were issued voters card and were allowed to cast their votes. So for me, no matter what we have done, I realized that we have not been able to manage that to the point that we have seen someone who is an underage voter and we could not demand for their birth certificate or their NIN in order to ensure that this person is of age allowed by law to cast their votes.
Yeah, that's interesting. William on the chat is actually saying the use of technology can increase voter turnout at voting points. However, if not well managed, it could further disenfranchise voters, especially where there are technological challenges. Yeah, and William is joining us from Nigeria. The same is being reiterated by Benjamin, who's saying that the use of technology in Nigeria in the just concluded 2023 elections actually seemed to have been another method for results manipulation. And I think with that, I'd like to pose the question on voter suppression, right? So when it comes to this particular elections, was the use of technology actually used to suppress, you know, the voters' rights within the electoral context? Okay, so I don't know if that question is clear, or do I probably redefine it in a way?
Rispa, I would love you to present the question, because I think I got about 2 views from it, so I will need to be sure.
I think we've lost you for a bit, but I think you've asked me to redefine that question, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
Oh, okay. So based on just the comments that you have made, where people are not able, for instance, to really clarify that the person who's voted is actually, you know, within the law able to do so. And we've even had instances where in Kenya, for instance, there was a lot of vote buying. And I think the same was also regurgitated within the particular jurisdiction of Nigeria. The question is, do you think the use of technology has actually suppressed a voter's rights when it comes to that electoral process and context?
Well, when you look at it, the deployment of technology for election in Nigeria, particularly in the February 2023 presidential election. Now, what we have seen is that we have seen cases where some voters could not actually be verified. And of course, INEC, which is the Electoral Commission, made a position prior to the election that, look, whenever any voter shows up to cast their vote, the beavers will be made use of to verify such a voter. And of course, in an event of failure of verification, about 3 attempts will be made to ensure verification. When the 3rd attempt fails, such a voter will not be allowed to cast their vote. Now, however, I have actually come across instances where some voters said, yes, the beavers failed to verify me 3 times. And of course, I insisted that I still want to cast my vote. And on the 4th or 5th attempt, then I was able to, I was verified and I was able to cast my vote. So when you look at it, there could be some irregularities, maybe in the use of the deployment of the technology, or the competence or the operation by the electoral officer in charge of the device. So sometimes we may actually have to look at some of these issues holistically. Now, for how long has the Electoral Commission trained these people who are handling these devices? These are some of the questions that need to be asked. For how long, how effective are some of these? In fact, there'll be instances where some devices will run out of battery. What do? There'll be instances where there will be lack of network for the devices to be able to actually upload results in some polling units. So these are the issues that have to be looked at. But when it comes to the issue of verification, I think the Electoral Commission also foresaw that, and it issued a guideline that in an event of failure, beavers must actually be used in 3 attempts for verification of a voter. If it fails on the 3rd attempt, then the voter may not be able to cast the vote.
That's very interesting, because that was another issue that came up within the Kenyan elections. And what we finally had the IEBC doing was allowing for that manual register to actually roll out in particular counties. So it was very interesting to find that in the Nigerian context, so long as the BVAS is not working, then you cannot vote. I think, what are your thoughts on that? Should that continue to be upheld, or do you think that's actually really not good for the voter who's trying to exercise their rights?
Now, Rispa, when you look at it, now at the moment that BVAS fails to accredit to verify me, now I may not be able to, even the handler of the device may not be able to give an explanation for the failure of accreditation. Now, and of course, if I can present my permanent voter's card, that look, I got registered, and of course, this is me standing before you, and I'm here for accreditation. Now, the narrative is now the word of the official of INEC against my own word. And at that moment, now the official may not be able to resolve that situation. The only thing he or she can do is to follow the guideline laid down by the Electoral Commission, which is in failure of the BVAS to accredit me in 3 attempts, then of course I may not be able to be allowed to vote. But like I've said, I have actually heard of instances where it has to be on the 5th attempt that some voters were accredited. As long as you are still on the queue there, and you see that, look, I still need to cast my vote, then you should be allowed. But I think there is no system that's perfect in technology. So these are some of the issues that will give us an ongoing conversation, that in event of that, what can we do? Some persons have said, look, if BVAS cannot accredit a voter, that voter, there should be a system by which the voter should be allowed to be accredited manually. Maybe there should be a manual register in this situation. But then some of the issues is this. Look, the BVAS captures your biometrics, but that register may not be able to detect my facial appearance or my fingerprints. And that's actually one of the things that BVAS can do. So BVAS can comprehensively accredit a particular voter, which manual register may not be able to do. But then I can tell you categorically, if we have a system that BVAS can solve about 85% of that problem of accreditation, then I think we are good to go.
Yeah. And talking about the kind of data that is captured by these different devices, so your facial images, your biometrics, and then just the magnitude of the data that goes around, for instance, your name, your location, your gender, your occupation, it really captures quite a chunk of data. And one of the issues that was coming up with this was the privacy concerns around it, right? And so within the Kenyan context, of course, our Data Protection Act allows for localization of data in the context of elections. So it says that either it's going to be locally stored or a serving copy of the same must be resident within our jurisdiction. What is the position in Nigeria, and what are some of the privacy concerns that came about with the kind of data that is being handled by these devices?
Yes, beautifully, to start with, I think Kenya has actually made remarkable progress, and I think putting itself up as a model for the rest of the African continent. If you look at it, beyond the DPA in Kenya, Section 25 of the IEBC Act states categorically that the data protection principles outlined in the DPA will be adhered to when it comes to conduct of election in Kenya. Now, of course, I'm sure you're aware that as of today, Nigeria doesn't have a Data Protection Act. What we have is a regulation, which is a subsidiary legislation. So which is the Nigeria Data Protection Regulation 2019. But be that as it may, I have seen attempt by the electoral body in Nigeria, INEC, to ensure that the practice or the conduct of election complies with data protection principles. Where how that is implemented is for us to see. It's another thing. So when you visit the website of INEC, you're going to see Data Protection Bill 2022. Now, for me, the display of Data Protection Bill, whether it is meant to show a voter, an aggregate voter, that look, your personal data will be protected, or principles of data protection will be complied with, it's one thing, or whether there is a commitment to protect personal data is another thing. But as far as the Electoral Act 2022 is concerned, there are no express provisions as to protection of personal data. And I can tell you categorically, yes, there may be efforts here and there, but we are yet to witness consistent and demonstrated commitment to protection of personal data in conduct of election in Nigeria, and of course, as to the last presidential election conducted on February 2025.
Wow, that's a serious concern, considering just how primary privacy and data protection is as a discussion point, and also considering that database is actually held to be one of the largest, actually if not the largest within the African context, right?
Well, if you look at it, as at 2023 today, the Electoral Commission Nigeria registered over 93 million voters. So what we are saying now is that commission has personal data of over 93 million. Well, I'm not sure of any other country in Africa that has such data of voters, held by its electoral body. That's a whole lot. But of course, whether you like it or not, the commission has a duty, under the data protection principles to install enhanced technology. Number two, of course, by and large, we have seen INEC demonstrate or living consistent to some data protection principle. For example, when it comes to accuracy of data, the INEC within the last 6 months have actually communicated to the general public that, look, if you have been enrolled in a particular location, but you are no longer living there, but you need to update your data. In fact, you need to move your PVC to another location, then do comply with these provisions, that comply with this guideline, then we will do that and update your personal data. I think to an extent they have done that. But what we are saying is that there must be clear demonstration of commitment to protection of personal data. And that will first come from, even by documenting it in a legislation. And of course, guidelines issued pursuant to that legislation.
Okay, thanks for that, Solomon. You've mentioned something which reminded me about the whole issue around identifying your polling units. Now, one thing I think IEBC did well here in Kenya was to cap the number of people who could go to a particular polling station, what you people call the polling unit, to 800. But then in your case, we found that even on the day of election, there are polling units with less than 10 people, that there were others with over, 3,000 people who are supposed to register from a particular place. And then we also saw places where people could no longer still identify where exactly it is they're supposed to be voting from. And the commission there will refer people to the portal and ask them, we've put all this information online, just log in and be able to identify where it is, you're supposed to be registering, you're supposed to be voting from. However, the challenge was connectivity. There are some people who didn't have access to, whether it's internet, they're not able to get this information. And so again, it led to a number of people not actually being able to buy. So I think my question to you is, in terms of just this particular, say, technical support, so whether it's connectivity, whether it's access to information, do you really think we are equipped to actually be able to continue rolling out technology as we have it?
Well, I think the very best thing that has happened to our continent, in day-to-day activities is technology. When you look at it, in fact, I can tell you that fintech in Nigeria, for example, works even better than some part of the West, and that's it. So in Nigeria today, when you actually transfer money, the other person, the recipient, get the money real time in a matter of seconds. And the same thing we have decided to adopt in conduct of our elections. Now, adopting that, if it is maximally utilized, I can tell you that it increases transparency and it actually puts trust in the people. When you look at it, when we talk about the conduct, the issues of political apathy, the first thing that you should ask is that, do the people trust the system? You see, I can only participate in the process I have trust in. When trust is lost, then regardless of whatever you put in place, then you can't achieve anything. So for me, yes, we could be having TT challenges today. That is not enough reason to throw the baby with the bathwater. So there should be consistent review of the system every other day. Of course, in Nigeria today, now I'm sure the electoral body had a review of the presidential election held on February 25, 2023, and of course is willing to make improvement towards the gubernatorial election to be held on March 11, 2023. So, this is the journey. So we are moving from one state to the other. So, and I can tell you categorically that I want to believe that by 2027, the nation should have actually experienced, a large improvement from what we have witnessed in 2023.
Yeah, and I see Hussein is echoing your sentiments where he said, when it comes to matters of connectivity, it is strange to have IBC complain that parts of the country are not connected when IBC has had 5 years prior to election to ensure that this was done. We have the Universal Service Fund, and that should have been used to handle such cases. So I think, yes, there is definitely that need to make sure that the infrastructure is in place. However, we cannot discount, the strides that we have made, like Solomon has actually articulated. Now, I want to come to the end of this discussion or dialogue between me and Solomon and involve the rest of the team. But lastly, I probably just want to focus on the portal, right? And that is the dispatchment of the results and how that has been managed. Now, in Kenya, the uploading was, almost instant, and it went on for quite a while. And from that is where now cases of misinformation heavily lied because of, the conversations that came up on, the different social media platforms as a result. However, in the Nigerian context, what I see was the primary challenge is actually that uploading of the results, where we find that, a day or two later, there's still quite a chunk of the results that were still not uploaded within the portal. There was a go slow on the portal, and it was quite a challenge to actually be able to get the kind of information that was actually being, uploaded thereon. So I think my question will be with regards to just results management and how that rolled out within the Nigerian context.
Yes, the INEC manual, which was actually issued pursuant to Section 149 of the Electoral Act 2022 now provides in its paragraph 38 for collation and for uploading of results from the polling unit upon completion of voting at polling unit. Now, when you look at it, the use of the phrase upon completion signifies immediately. However, there with those instances where some voters, decried the process that happened in their polling unit, where the INEC officials could not upload some, coming up with, stories around network that, okay, that the fact their devices could actually did not have network to immediately upload the result. And of course, for every voter who had cast his vote, who has performed his own side of the whole process, now needed to be sure that his vote will count by immediate uploading of the result. But then, so one of the challenges we have was the fact that many voters realized that that was not done. And of course, to them, that actually signaled the beginning of electoral malpractices. And that's it. So, but then we have actually had arguments that, look, the paragraph that provides for uploading of results stated that upon completion, that upon completion does not clearly state that it has to be immediate at the polling unit. So now, when you look at it, such a dispute may not be a dispute that even the Electoral Commission itself can actually lay to rest. That may be one of the, I'm sure for some of the parties and candidates who felt aggrieved by the conduct of the election had actually headed to the court. So this is one of the issues that I believe that the court will have to lay to rest. But trust me, if I'm going to give a very candid opinion as to that, I think we should have a system where we must be able to upload the result real time. You see, the moment I know that the result of my polling unit has been uploaded real time, I know that the incidences of compromise, incidences of electoral malpractice, have actually been eliminated significantly. Because by then I know that the 47 that was recorded in my polling unit is the 47 that actually would display or show up at the National Collation Center. So I think that is actually the major challenge that many voters and of course many stakeholders experienced during the last election conducted in Nigeria. And of course, this actually calls on the electoral body to ensure that, look, if you are giving your words to this kind of practice, then there must be a corresponding commitment to ensure it's done. Whatever devices, whatever infrastructure that need to be in place. I mean, for crying out loud, the Nigerian Electoral Commission got a huge sum, a huge budget to run that election. I mean, something close to $500 million. I mean, Nigerian money, it was 350 billion naira. That's a huge sum. So many Nigerians actually got so disappointed that, look, you had enough time to conduct this election. You had enough budget to run this election, whatever it is, and you have given your word to us that results will be uploaded immediately. But like I said, when it comes to the issue of interpretation, which will be left to the discretion of the court, the use of the completion now, another thing have to be expanded. Whether upon completion means immediately at the polling unit, or upon completion means after the completion, before the declaration of the result, that's another thing. So, I believe that for the purpose of subsequent election, the gubernatorial election and the elections after 2023, the Electoral Commission in Nigeria needs to do a whole lot better when it comes to uploading of results.
Yeah. And Benjamin supports. In Nigeria, the uploading of results were filled with a lot of funny processes, which will give Nigerians more reasons not to trust the INEC body. I think at the heart of it is that element of trust, like you mentioned. And you've raised the issue and the conversation around the courts. We have with us Oginga, who I think will help us just quickly go through, the court process and the role that they play within the use of tech within the electoral processes across, different jurisdictions. And I think they play a very fundamental role because, as you have talked about how interpretation lies to, different laws and different regulations, they actually are very crucial to that process. And we'll again tie this to, the conversation around the skill and knowledge and whether our courts actually are equipped to, interpret the different elements that connote to technology. So I don't know if you can confirm whether Oginga is on the call so that he can just quickly unpack that aspect for us and we can be able to begin to close our discussion today. So Oginga, are you able to hear us?
Yes, can you hear me and see me?
Yes, you can. So quickly just introduce yourself and give us, some of the work that you do, and then maybe unpack for us the role that the courts have played when it comes to, interpreting, the use of technology within our jurisdiction.
Thank you so much, Rispa and Silas. Again, I want to say thank you to Solomon for the amazing insights about Nigeria. Yeah, by way of introduction, my name is Arnold Ocheng Oginga. I run my law firm, Ocheng Oginga and Company Advocates, and I'm currently a co-founder for ID8 Tech Policy Africa, where we deal with a lot of stuff to do with technology, tech law, litigation, advocacy, looking at human rights in the digital age, then data protection issues, AI, etc. You can look at our website, itpa.africa. Yeah, now for today, I won't spend so much time because of the time constraint, but let me begin by talking generally about e-voting. First of all, internet voting as a concept is yet to be adopted by many African states. And I will argue perhaps the biggest setback boils down to capacity in terms of infrastructure and digital literacy. But not just that, I also pose the question, maybe, is there no political will, to go the internet way in e-voting, given that the history that we've seen, the way African countries behave in handling elections. Even if you look at our history in terms of like Kenya, moving away from the queuing system of voting, now the implications of adopting technology. Now, again, advantages of e-voting in the electoral process have been identified. For example, some would say it is anticipated in terms of cost savings, fraud reductions, increased accuracy, and speed of results tabulation and computing. Again, the accessibility in terms of limiting the aspect of voter disenfranchisement, so that at the click of a button, anybody from anywhere can vote. Again, the paradox that all people always speak about is how comes that food reliefs cannot reach certain areas of the country, and yet voting materials can reach certain areas, so that even the aspect of utilizing e-voting can really assist in terms of reachability. Again, finally, in terms of improved accessibility for voters with disabilities and for remote and overseas communities. Now, looking at Kenya as a legal basis, my beginning point, I'll fall back to the Constitution of Kenya, which recognizes and sets out principles. And I believe Kenya is one of those progressive constitutions which have explicitly recognized the aspect of incorporation of technology in the voting procedures. So that if you look at, you collectively read Articles 38, 81, and 86, you'll notice that under our constitution, the electoral system needs to be simple, accurate, verifiable, secure, accountable, and transparent. So that within the Kenyan scope, technology has been widely used, as was mentioned earlier by our first speaker, and the main one being voter registration, results transmission, data storage, then access to electoral system software, source codes. Now, in general, looking at the challenges in Africa, as I'll demonstrate shortly, going by the judicial pronouncements within the African continent, for a few selected jurisdictions, there is a common challenges that run across the selected jurisdictions in Africa. And for these jurisdictions, Yeah, the qualifications for choosing them is that these are the reported cases which have dealt specifically with the question of use of technology in elections. And more importantly, they are presidential election petitions. So that there is also that concept whereby in Africa, we see this common feature whereby African countries have largely concentrated the utilization of technology in presidential elections specifically. Yeah. So again, it poses the question, why focus so much only on presidential elections? That's a question for another day. Now, in terms of challenges, firstly, one, Rispa, you pointed out actually is the question of lack of trust. Who do we trust? Do we trust the court, the electoral system, the electoral bodies, yeah, the candidates, the agents, the election observers? And then closely related with that, I'll also pose the aspect of court competence, because at the end of the day, judicial officers, not most of them are well-versed with aspects of technology, aspects of modern emerging technologies. So that if you look at all these election petitions, most of the time, I'll even say 100% of the time, the courts rely majorly on the depositions to be given by the electoral bodies, yeah, in part of their response to most of these election petitions. So that if you look at also the pleadings by the parties, most of them largely rely on expert testimonies. And most of these experts are well versed with the technological aspects in general, yeah, so that they also have to, like, most of the time address their concerns. Sorry. Can you hear me? I lost you for a minute.
Yeah, you're very clear.
Yes. So most of the time they are largely concerned with a particular aspect or application or technology specific to a certain incident. Now, the other issue also that has been viewed as a challenge in Africa with most of the technologically advance and utilization in elections, that is the aspect of transparency. Yeah, despite having the utilization of technology, there's still a lot of questions being raised in regard to transparency. And for example, in Kenya now, the biggest question has always been open the server. Yeah, to what extent? Even the courts go to an extent and order for the opening of the server, and then even despite that, it is still not satisfactorily taken by the parties. Again, also, if you look at the history, in all the occasions whereby the Electoral Commission was asked to open the servers, now the challenge has always been the third parties holding ICT technology infrastructure. Now, and the biggest question they always pose is, due to intellectual property rights, we are unable. Then it raises a lot of questions, because now the democracy of the country, now should the private interests of a corporation aimed at making profits supersede those of a democracy? That's a question for you to think about, yeah? And then closely related with that as well is the question of accountability. Now, who is to be held accountable? Failure to open the servers, is it the electoral body? Is it the procuring entity that was given the mandate to host the server? Then how do we enforce? It is after the election, it is after the fact, yeah? So again, we can do a better comparison with this. We saw in the recent past in the US, whereby even the Senate committees have the powers to summon even tech companies to question and hold them accountable for any issues raised with regard to any technology supplied in the use of elections. Now, going back to my main points now, permit me now to highlight the use of technology in elections and the judicial pronouncements from four jurisdictions. I'll mention Kenya in passing. And for Kenya, reference, you'll get the reference in two keys, the Supreme Court decisions, that is Raila Odinga and another, versus the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission and others, that is the Supreme Court petition number 1 of 2017, where the issue of technology was at the core of the dispute and the elections, and mostly it was in regard to the transmission of election results. As you are aware from the minor KI decision, the election results for presidentials, once declared at the polling stations, they are final, and they're supposed to be transmitted electronically to the tallying center, so that by that, it is settled. So that a lot of issues that arose in 2017 was in regard to the failure to transmit most of these results, whereby we had returning officers and presiding officers bringing the physical copies of the forms purported to be results declarations. So that at the end of the day, we had like a number of polling stations which had not electronically transmitted results as required. Then secondly, the second point of reference in terms of judicial decisions, I'll refer to Martha Karua and another versus the IEBC, that is Supreme Court petition number 5 of 2022. Again, the question of an interesting allegation that was raised was in regard to interference with the uploading of the results and then the bulk transmission of results, because one of the arguments posed by the petitioners was that after the close of polling stations, at some point, we had results streaming in a reasonable consequence, in a reasonable sequence. Yeah. Then after sometimes the system stopped transmitting results. Then it held on for quite a few minutes. Then there was a bulk, what the petitioners refers to as staging of results. Yeah. So that one also posed a lot of questions. Again, in 2022, the issue of opening the servers came again. The court made the order. There was partial compliance with that order. But again, the hosts who hosted the IT election infrastructure declined to permit the opening of the entire server and cited intellectual property rights. Yeah, unfortunately, this is one of the issues that was not addressed by the Supreme Court. Another issue that was raised was in terms of data transfer, the sharing of our information and data by third parties outside the country, so that we had really hoped as petitioners that the Supreme Court will also address that key concern. Now, secondly, permit me to talk briefly about Sierra Leone. I must commend Sierra Leone first because it is among one of the first African countries to adopt e-technology, e-voting. And interestingly, they're using the blockchain system. Like, for example, in 2015, they adopted a system called Agora e-voting, which they largely utilize basically from voter registration, casting of votes, counting of votes, and finally for results transmission. Yeah, just again, in Sierra Leone, I remember for reference, you'll refer to the case of Sylvia Blyden and others versus the Chief Electoral Commissioner of Sierra Leone and others. That is a 2018 decision, whereby it was a challenge to the presidential election. And one of the contention was actually that there was a third version of register being used by the electoral system. And one of the key issues that came up also for determination was that by the utilization of the technology, there was a proper way to verify this assertion of a voting allegations by basically looking and tracing back, auditing the IT infrastructure and system used. Now, secondly, permit to go to Ghana. Now, Ghana also has largely used technology in terms of biometric voter registration, so that they're utilizing applications and IT infrastructure for fingerprint and face photo technology to verify the authenticity of the voter. Now, for Ghana, you'll look at the case of Nana. That is the Nana presidential petition. That was Nana Addo Akufo and others versus John Dramani Mahama and others, whereby, again, another allegation was made in terms of inception. I can see a question, but let me just finish. I'll get back to the question. Yeah, in the Nana Akufo case, the main question was in regard to the allegation on staging and interception of results. Yeah, whereby the petitioners alleged that there was a middleman. Yeah, from the transition of the results of the polling station before it is finally announced, there was a middleman somewhere staging the results and releasing them onwards. Now, finally, permit me to address the question of Malawi, where technology has equally been used in terms of tallying, tabulation, and transmission of the results. Now, for this one, the common case that comes to mind is the presidential petition by Chilima, which is Dr. Saulos Chilima and Dr. Chakwere versus Professor Mutharika. That is a 2019 decision, whereby among the allegations that were made include that the failure by the commission to electronically collate tally, and transmit results accurately, failure to ensure that the relaying of results from the polling stations it was done in a secure, accountable, accurate, and verifiable manner. And then also the question of kits that were used to transmit results, because initially, and what I've seen the practice from most of these African countries, is that where they deploy KIMS kits to transmit results, it is tailored in such a way that one KIMS kit is specified and designed for one particular polling station. And this allegation was made within the Malawi context, equally also in Kenya, whereby the allegation was that how comes this kit tailored for transmitting results in polling station A was transmitting other results for polling stations X, Y, and Z. So these are some of the questions. So that if you look at all this in general, the issue of trust, I go back to the issue of trust, accountability, and transparency, and then the procurement of election technology, and lastly, and more importantly, the aspect of court competence. So that in this conversation, we should not just walk alone as practitioners, we should have all stakeholders on board, including the electoral bodies and the judges. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, permit me to leave it at that point for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cheng. I think that was very insightful, especially a further research on the Sierra Leone case. And I think there are a few people who would like just to have you quote some of those cases on the chat section for their benefit. But I think what you have primarily really focused on or highlighted would be that element of court and judicial competency. And I don't know, let me finalize, and I'll come back to Solomon in terms of, you know, the court process in Nigeria and what that looks like, because at least for us, it's very clear. You quickly head to the Supreme Court. I don't know what it's like in Nigeria, and what are some of the things that have recurred within that context. But before I get to that and I finalize with Solomon, I think one element that we must highlight before we wrap up this conversation will definitely be issues around misinformation, you know, disinformation, fake news, and that was definitely very heavily reflected within the Kenyan context in our election period. Primarily, of course, it started way before the election day, but we saw a complete boom on it just on the election day, and now the follow-up as we awaited the results. So because of the different ways and manners in which people were able to quickly tabulate the results, we had different people, you know, sharing who has won on Twitter. Everyone was a winner on the different stations that we had. And so we had social media platforms really becoming a great avenue through which information was quickly shared and different things were quickly being, you know, truncated across. And because of the ease with which we can be able to use social media, because of how it can reach to very many people, and because of connectivity, which has, you know, really improved in past years, then we saw a lot of this information quickly spreading, and there was a lot of whether it's tension or whether it's apprehension within the jurisdiction. So I'll quickly allow Silas to just within the next 2 or 4 minutes tell us, you know, what did we see from the different reports and the occurrences that were happening in Nigeria when it comes to misinformation.
Yes, Thank you so much, Rispa. And to just make it so clear, misinformation and disinformation has been there even before technology or social media was introduced. And what social media is coming up to do is because there is now immediate spread of misleading information to millions of people with social media as a tool. And you'd find that misinformation is bad. Why should you care? Because this destroys lives. It ruins the democracy in the nation. And you'd find also that the voter does not have accurate information when he or she is going to cast that ballot. So I'd mention in terms of, even in terms of hate speech, you'd find that FIDA Nigeria was able to make that report that around 94% of ladies, women in Nigeria were actually affected with this violence on social media. And this is making even women afraid of taking part in this election. And you'd also find that Integrity Institute was also making his own report and saying that Facebook had a lower misinformation amplification factor than Twitter. I'd want to just pass across that Facebook made some significant approach in actually just making sure that we do not really spread as much as more misinformation out there. But we could see that platforms such as Twitter were not able to see that much step in terms of really cutting out this misinformation that is in these platforms. There was the Nigeria Fact Checkers Coalition that brought about like 12 civil society organizations together to just watch the misinformation that was online, and Meta gave the platform for them to actually use this information in terms of giving them ability to search and give them ability to actually identify this kind of misinformation that is there online. And Full Fact, which is also an organization that came in to actually give AI tools that better the way this misinformation was censored online. So I think misinformation was also, misinformation and disinformation was also very prevalent in this Nigeria's election. And you can see even in Kenya, you'll see instances where people already sharing information online about the results and verified results, even before they were hailed out by the IBC or the INEC. So we actually really asking ourselves, who should we really trust? Because the APO or the polling, the presiding officers in these stations, more so for Nigeria, they actually promised to actually give accurate information in a prompt manner so that this information is not really spread out as fast. But anyway, I'd say that these platforms, they are there as a tool, but we should really be there to actually watch the kind of information that we're spreading out and the kind of information that we're actually mixing in. And they actually they just did a survey and they found out that 74% of people don't actually mind watching false information online. And Meta was actually proud in a sense that 63% of people in their survey, they found out that the posts that they censored, people were saying that they were fairly censored, meaning that this information was not really verified. So I think those were some of the false claims that were there in terms of the size of the rallies. People are just making some weird approximation in terms of favoring their political parties. And this time we had like 3 political parties vying for this general presidential elections. So all of those parties were actually so dominantly making misinformation and disinformation in the social media platforms.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thanks for that great highlight, Silas. I think we can't dispute that there's a heavy move towards, these platforms.
Yes.
So whether it's the political actors, whether it's the citizenry, whether it's, the bodies themselves, everyone is on these platforms. And that's something we need to come to terms with and try to see how we can make sure that engagement is actually credible and accurate and not, a mistool that is, being used to propagate other things.
And just to clarify on that, I feel like the rules or the regulations that are coming out, actually the Nigerian authorities are actually trying to come up with rules, but they are very vague as of right now. You'd find that the only regulation that is there is in the 2015 Cybercrime Act, where it just talks about cyber stalking. Yeah. So you'd find that the government of Nigeria or the Nigerian authorities should come out and actually make more regulations on this misinformation and disinformation to actually cater for them. Yes, they are there, but we should actually acknowledge that they are there and make sure that there are regulations that are meant for them, majorly for these times for the elections. I think Also, the political parties can actually make the people who are mentioning this false information accountable for whatever they're really saying in these platforms.
But I think that's political parties also propagating,
news, yeah,
there's a lot to that.
Yeah, there's a lot to that.
Okay, yes. So I think I want to go back to Solomon and also go back to the people who've joined us. We've had some great insights from you. I think let me just read a few of the comments that we've had so far. Maybe we could just go to earlier comments as they were coming in. So yeah, we had Hussein talking about, the Data Protection Act. Should IEBC really accept the storage of voter data by a foreign entity? And why can't Kenya, which is a powerhouse in matters tech, develop its own transparent voting system? And I think the same was also seen in Nigeria, where INEC stated that they actually came up with the master plan and the design for the systems, but then they outsourced that kind of responsibility to a foreign entity, which again, you are not really able to get the data on exactly who it is that they were dealing with, what was that process like, who has access to what, who has what controls. So at least on our end, it wasn't really clear those particular elements. And it's a concern that keeps recurring. If we can trust, I think someone talked about M-Pesa and the banking system, the fintech, if we can be able to trust that, why can't we adapt the same kind of mechanisms, for our election processes? And I think someone else talked about the use of e-voting. We hail it and say that I believe it will bring massive progress and ease to the electoral processes in Africa. That is from Israel, who's I think joining us from Nigeria. And then, of course, the question again was as to the protection of these systems, which is recurring through and through, and the trust of the systems. Then how we talked about who do you trust when using the technological space? Is it the tools or is it the human being using the tech tools? Can e-voting solve the problems of vote stuffing, voter transfer, and results projection, from the polling stations? What happens when phishing, hacking interference with the votes? The solutions should be a hybrid system, that is e-voting, digital literacy, and manual operations, where voting at the polling station should be final without alterations.
And just to help RISPA out, I can see Tuahir Hussein is actually saying the psychological tension normally arises due to the opacity of the processes. If the processes are transparent, these issues would not arise. Yes, just going on, I can see Rita Chinda. She's saying, please, can Ochieng mention that case involving IP and maybe a link to Sierra Leone's use of blockchain? Yes, I can also see Tabitha Wangeshi is actually saying the blockchain fraternity is impressed particularly by the Sierra Leone case. And Benjamin is actually clarifying that no doubts that we trust our technological space. One amongst many is the mobile banking, but you should know that there have been a lot of records in cybercrime, such as hacking of most of these technological systems. Don't you think that desperate aspirants could hire tech gurus to hack into those systems? Also, Tuahir is actually also very active and is saying what raises eyebrows is that the voting process is fully automated using the KIMS kit. This says that voting data should be transmitted through to the back end. What was rather questionable was seeing the same data being tabulated using Excel in the county tally stations. Diana Nyakundi is also just saying, thank you for such great insights, Ochieng. So big up Ochieng for such great insight. And I think that's all from our chat section.
Okay. I think just to wrap up our discussions and talking about the Excel sheet, I think one of the funny things that happened, I think from my end was in Nigeria, we saw there was, I don't know that this is fake news. Let me just say that.
I will verify it for you,
but,
don't worry.
I saw that someone said that there was the uploading of someone's photo on the portal. Was that really accurate?
Yeah. Actually, it was part of also things that were making people look at the incompetence of.
But you're sure that is accurate? It wasn't
There's a video flowing out online about it.
It's fine. There's a video, but is it verified? So someone in Nigeria or Israel, yes, that's true. Wow.
Yes.
Okay, so that goes again to just the issues of, credibility and the trust of the systems.
Yes.
And I think as a way of closing the discussion, I'd like to go back to Solomon to kind of just tell us some of the proposals or recommendations that you may have, because we've talked about, credibility, we've talked about trust, we've talked about, issues around digital literacy and skill, which is definitely something that is recurring. The continent needs to come to that place of literacy, and we need to further engage when it comes to digital skills, when it comes to bringing everyone on board and, to understanding. We've talked about issues around court competence and whether they're actually able to understand and interpret appropriately, how we are using technology. We've talked about alternative forms of technology. So like the blockchain being used in Sierra Leone, and how we can be able to integrate or adapt that into our different, jurisdictions. So we've had really healthy and good conversations around these recurring topics. And so I'll hand it over to you, Solomon, to probably tell us some of the recommendations that you may have or practices that you think we could adopt moving forward now that tech is here to stay.
Okay, Rispa, and thank you so much, Silas, also for your insightful contribution. Now, by way of recommendations to start with, if you realize some of the concerned stakeholders who had actually expressed their displeasure about the February 25, 2023 election, the main concern has been around the transmission of results. And if you look at it, even the paragraph that provides for that in the manual, released by INEC, that paragraph says, on completion of all voting activities and results. Now, if you look at it, most provisions of law are always advised to be detailed in nature, to admit no ambiguity. Now, so if INEC had actually given us something like on completion of voting exercise, all results shall be uploaded immediately, not exceeding a number of stipulated period. Now, you see, INEC cannot come to the tribunal and tell us that, look, on completion could actually mean a day, 2 days, 3 days, or 7 days after completion of the exercise. Because when you look at that guideline did not specify in details within which time the presiding officer has a duty to upload the results. Now, and my fear is that at the tribunal, that may actually be an escape route for INEC. So it is very important that for purpose of subsequent elections, let the electoral body come up with very specific timeline within which a presiding officer has a duty during the exercise to upload results. So it is not just enough to say upon completion of electoral exercise. No. Let us have a completion of electoral exercise. The presiding officer shall have not more than 3 hours to upload all results. How? In case of technical disorder, failure of network, or some other instances, then there should be this period extended. But on no account should it be more than 5 hours, 6 hours, or 7 hours. In fact, that guideline could even go as much as giving a position that the presiding officer shall not leave the polling unit or polling station, as it is called in Kenya, before the results are transmitted. That is very important, number one. Number two, I think INEC needs to do more, or of course, INEC and of course, IEBC in Kenya need to do more on sensitization of the public. Now, I could tell you categorically, when we're talking about misinformation, one of the reasons why misinformation thrives is for lack of information. And Silas, maybe I need to actually chip this in. I can tell you that in most democratic societies around the world, misinformation and disinformation do not disappear by mere legislation. No, legislation have not been able to effectively curb misinformation and disinformation. Now, if you look at it, those who walk around that space will tell you that you can only counter misinformation or disinformation or even a counter speech. That's the information, the direct information, the real information. So when misinformation are going about, that body has a duty to come up with the real information. And that is it. I tell you categorically that the more you criminalize misinformation, the more it festers. Because you see, the picture you give the public is the fact that, oh, they do not want us to talk about this, they don't want us to talk about that. Let me give an example. There was a time when a particular government official in Nigeria was alleged to have actually appropriated a sum of about 25 million naira for grass cutting. Now, to an average citizen, that project shouldn't cost more than maybe ₦1 million or less. Now, instead of doing that, if the government had actually gone after those who posted that information, what the masses would believe is that, look, you had the real information. Come out to tell us that, look, 25 million naira was never budgeted for grass cutting. It was just 500,000 naira. And if it is possible, substantiate that with proof, documentary proof, invoices and all of that. But instead of doing that, we have a situation where government goes about those who spread that misinformation. And when you do that, what you are doing is that you are going after the messenger, leaving the message. Now, you allow the message to fester, to go on and on and on. So for me, categorically, I think beyond coming up with guidelines, the body that has the real information has a duty to, in real time, begin to engage the public. And that is the body all our electoral commissions have on them. They have the real information. We, the citizens, don't have them. Then they need to engage us. And sometimes they need to, for example, in a nation like Nigeria, we have 3 major languages. So I recommend that beyond dissemination of information in English language, which is official language, they should disseminate information in Yoruba, Hausa, Igbo, which have a majority of the citizens communicate in. That's the second recommendation I'm going to make. Well, I think another one is where for us as the citizen, just like Sellers rightly opined, misinformation and disinformation, it can be very terrible. Now, and can actually go as far as creating chaos in the system. Now, you see, that happened a whole lot during the last concluded election in Nigeria. And that actually brings us to fact-checking on for us as citizens. When we get any information, the first thing is that which media platform published it? Is it a credible media platform? Or is it Solomon Town Square ORG? Or it is the Guardian newspaper? Or it is the Rice newspaper? So we need to find out, too, which other media platform have shared or communicated that information. Then another thing we can look at is that, can such a situation have happened in that? Let me give an example. Somebody sent a particular information to me yesterday saying that United Kingdom will be asking for £3,000 as a bond for any person who is applying from some 6 countries, including Nigeria, for visa visa. So the first thing I did was actually to go to check the origin, the source of the information. And when I checked the source, I wasn't convinced because it wasn't like a popular media platform. Then I found out that information was published in 2013. Now, so for us as citizens, we need to put on our fact-checking cap at all times. Because when a nation becomes destabilized, we all will suffer for it. Then I think the Electoral Commission has a duty to regularly conduct a review of its practices. Now, we are not going to have a perfect electoral exercise at any time. Now, this is an ongoing process. So from time to time, we need to be doing that. Then, of course, I also encourage and, of course, recommend strict adherence to the law and guidelines. Like I said, if the guideline says this should be done, then it has to be done. Because when you look at the presidential election of 2017 in Kenya, where Raila Odinga disputed the results, against Kenyatta. Now, one of the grants is on the transmission of results. And of course, the court actually entertained it. The only that we need to know, and just as the two leading opposing parties and candidates have gone to the court now in Nigeria, the court needs to know whether their grants for that petition is sufficient enough to nullify the result. Let me say this, maybe by way of my view on the outcome of the petition in Nigeria. Now, while there may be credible grants for petition, the court will have to look at it, that are these grants sufficient to nullify? How many polling units are delayed in transmission of results? In how many polling units were the result not even transmitted at all? In how many polling units did we experience suppression of votes? In how many polling units did we experience underage voting? Yes, if they are sufficient enough, my call would be to the Nigerian judiciary to, for a moment, actually rise to the occasion and show that desired courage. Now, the Kenya judiciary led by David Maraga in 2017 did that for the first time. I mean, the court declared a rerun. Supreme Court declared a rerun in 2017 in case of Raila Odinga and Raila Odinga and Kenyatta, Uhuru Kenyatta. Now, and of course, Nigerians will tell you that it has never happened for a Nigerian court to declare a rerun or nullify a presidential election. Well, of course, there's always a first time. But then the question we need to ask ourselves, will this grant be sufficient enough for the court to nullify or order a rerun of the election? That would be my recommendation.
Thank you so much, Solomon. And I think this has actually been a very insightful and knowledge-heavy discussion. So I'd like to close it off there. So that we are not awful, is there any one person on our call who'd like to say something from our participants so that we allow you to also engage with us as we are closing off? Any one person who can raise their hand? Wow, okay, that was fast. No, other than Oginga, is there any other person who's not had a chance to say anything? We have Jean. Yeah, Jean, you can be able to proceed. No, Jean is no longer with us, okay? Okay, that's okay. Then lastly, Oginga, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Rispa and Silas once again. Now, for me, some of the recommendations I would make firstly is that I would recommend STT, which I refer to strategic targeted training, so that this should mainly focus on specific key stakeholders. And then the specificity of the training also should incorporate aspects of the contents to be incorporated in the training. For example, it is not just about training how to register as a voter, but it has to go deep into issues of procurement. How does the election body procure election infrastructure? Then in terms of familiarity with the electoral infrastructure, how well is the public versed with the intended technology to be adopted in an election? The recent past has demonstrated that actually we are playing catch up, even the members of the public. It is only during the election petitions that people come to realize, oh, the survey is outside the country, certain data cannot be assessed, etc. And all this is after probably litigation and a court order. Now, the other issue also, we need to involve stakeholders from the very onset of inception, because in Kenya, it has always been just about litigation. After procurement has been issued, that's when litigation comes about. After the election, that's when now we are challenging the systems used, the infrastructure developed, and then that's when again we are raising issues of IP, data protection, so that we need the stakeholder involvement and members of the public in line with the requirements of openness, transparency, and accountability. So that again, all these will build in the trust and enhance transparency and accountability and openness in the process. Again, all this will really help in terms of knowing who to hold accountable, and also ascertaining whose fault was it. Because most of the cases, like you ask yourself, was the failure by certain kids in certain specific polling areas or constituency by design or by default. Yeah. Then what again is the import of laws requiring the inspection of election materials and infrastructure before elections. Then what happens if they fail? Then how do we hold people accountable? Then again, looking at the role of courts, and also as mentioned by Solomon, the courts have played a huge role, especially if you look at the Kenyan context. In 2017, the courts made recommendations. Now in 2022, again, far-reaching recommendations in terms of incorporation of technology in the forthcoming elections for 2017. Then closely related with that is the issue of following up on the court orders and ensuring compliance, so that it is not just about waiting until the next presidential election, then waiting again after the fact, then during the presidential petition that you say so-and-so did not comply with the order issued 5 years ago. As I close, finally, my closing remark is that I hope the adoption and use of technology in the elections will be the next best thing after sliced bread properly. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Oginga. And thank you for each one of the people who's been able to join us on this call. We apologize for the huge the amount of time we've taken. It's way overboard, but we are very grateful to have had you remain and have you engage with us. We hope to do a follow-up conversation on the same, because I think there's a lot to unpack. But I think at this juncture, I'd really like to close it here. And thank you once again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at the next Policy Monday. Make sure you tune in, because this is a norm. Make this a habit, right?
Yes.
And see you next week.
Thank you.